Most people think conflict is a liability. They avoid it, downplay it, or try to resolve it with soft skills and passive language. That's a strategic error. Because conflict, when understood and properly converted, is one of the fastest ways to gain power, authority, and respect, especially in high-stakes environments. The people who rise are not the ones who avoid tension. They're the ones who know how to transmute it. This protocol is not about managing conflict. It's about weaponizing it. It's about taking aggression, resistance, or social tension and using it to strengthen your position in real time. This is the conflict conversion protocol. And by the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to turn confrontation into control. Here's what most people miss. Conflict activates a very specific neurobiological loop in the brain. It triggers the amygdala, which initiates a threat response. That tightens the jaw, narrows the focus, and shifts the brain into defense mode. But here's the catch. When someone's brain is in threat mode, they also become more influenceable, not less. The brain is scanning for clarity, hierarchy, and safety. And the person who provides those signals in the moment of stress becomes the dominant reference point. This means that conflict isn't a breakdown in communication. It's a window to assert leadership. But to use that window, you need to stay calm while their system spikes. And you need to know exactly what to project. The first stage of the conflict conversion protocol is called the tension lock. The moment conflict begins, whether it's a disagreement, a raised tone, or even a passive-aggressive maneuver, you do not retreat. You match the level of tension with equal intensity, but you remove one ingredient, reactivity. You don't smile, you don't soften, but you also don't escalate emotionally. You hold eye contact. You reduce your verbal speed. You lower your vocal tone. What this does is signal composure under pressure. And the brain on the other side, which is in a state of scanning for cues, now tags you as stable and competent. This is not theory. This is primal circuitry. In dominance hierarchies, calm under threat equals authority. The second layer of the tension lock is tactical silence. Most people rush to defend themselves. That dilutes perceived power. Instead, when someone challenges you, you hold 1 to 2 seconds of deliberate silence before responding. That pause does 3 things. First, it increases perceived control. Second, it forces the other person to sit with their own emotional momentum. And third, it gives your executive brain time to choose the correct positioning. Remember, in high-pressure moments, speed of speech is inversely correlated with status. You slow the tempo. You compress your language. You signal that you're not rushed because you own the frame. Once the tension is locked, the next move is what separates tactical conflict from accidental chaos. It's not enough to just stay composed. You have to redirect the energy. And that's exactly what you're going to learn next. Because every ounce of conflict is raw energy. And if you know where to send it, you can flip a threat into loyalty. That's what the next phase of the protocol delivers. Now you enter the second stage of the conflict conversion protocol, directional redirection. The tension you've just stabilized is raw, unchanneled energy. And your job is to move that energy without losing control. Most people either escalate or fold. You're going to do neither. You're going to convert. The key to this conversion is recognizing that beneath every conflict is an unmet need or a perceived threat. When you redirect conflict, you're not solving emotions, you're hijacking momentum. And the brain responds to redirection when it feels like forward motion. The first tactic is called forced agreement framing. Here's how it works. You take the core objection or attack, and instead of refuting it directly, you reframe it into a principle that the other person must agree with to continue. For example, someone says, "You're not qualified to lead this." You don't argue qualifications, you respond with, "Exactly, which is why I rely on results instead of assumptions." What just happened? You reframed the energy into your frame and you forced agreement on the deeper level. The human brain is wired to resolve dissonance. When you create a clean, dominant frame in a moment of friction, their brain will begin adjusting to fit it. It's not persuasion, it's gravitational positioning. The second tactic is what I call the status swap pivot. In every conflict, there's an implicit status game being played. Who's right? Who's leading? Who's setting the tone? When someone pushes you, what they're really doing is testing for hierarchy. The moment you defend, you drop status. The moment you counterattack, you risk escalation. But when you reassign the game entirely, you collapse the status loop. Let's say someone questions your judgment in front of others. Instead of defending your logic, you pause, hold the silence, and say, "I appreciate the pressure. It tells me this matters." Now you've flipped the emotional spike into leadership posture. You're modeling control while elevating the other person's intensity as a signal of value. That's how you extract loyalty from resistance. The third tactic is authority anchoring. This means you consciously link your current behavior to a higher order mission, standard, or role that transcends the moment. It gives your position weight, not ego, not emotion, weight. For example, during conflict in a team setting, you anchor your calm posture to the performance standard. "I'm not here to win this exchange. I'm here to deliver the result we promised." Now the argument is beneath you. You've climbed to a higher altitude. The limbic system on the other side senses that shift. And because humans are wired to follow perceived leadership under stress, their system begins to recalibrate. Conflict isn't resolved, it's absorbed into hierarchy. At this point, you've done more than neutralize tension. You've begun reshaping the interaction. You've turned emotional heat into social gravity. But there's one more phase before full conversion is complete. Because influence doesn't just depend on control, it depends on memory. You want to leave a psychological imprint that makes the other person think differently about you next time, before they even speak. And that's what the third phase of the protocol is built to install. The third phase is called imprint engineering. Because conflict isn't just about how you handle it in the moment, it's about what the other person remembers after it. Their brain will store the emotional signature of that exchange, and your job is to make sure that what gets encoded is dominance, clarity, and psychological consistency. This is where most people fail. They win the argument but lose the imprint. They win the point but lose the position. The elite play is to use the conclusion of the conflict to lock in a new identity, not just for yourself, but in the other person's mind. You're not just ending a confrontation, you're installing a new reputation. The first tool is called contrast closure. When the tension starts to drop, you deliver a calm but deliberate reframing of what just happened. For example, after holding firm and redirecting the conflict, you say something like, "This is why I set the bar high. I expect the same intensity from myself." It sounds simple, but what you're doing is packaging the entire event into a narrative. The brain loves contrast and resolution. You're showing that what felt like confrontation was actually alignment on standards. That creates narrative closure, and it installs a new reference point for future interactions. Now, when they think of pushing against you, their brain recalls that it leads not to chaos, but to clarity and leadership. The second tool is delayed reinforcement. This is where you follow up after the conflict, not to revisit it emotionally, but to acknowledge the intensity and anchor the outcome. For instance, later that day or the next, you might say, "That earlier tension, good, it means the stakes matter." You're not apologizing, you're reinforcing strength and mutual respect. This is subtle but powerful, because most people avoid the follow-up. But by naming the intensity without emotion, you show that conflict doesn't destabilize you, it refines you. And that message creates long-term trust. Even with people who initially resisted you, this move often flips them into loyal allies. The third tool is what I call authority imprinting. This is where you embed your behavioral signature into their subconscious map of who you are. It's not about being liked. It's about being trusted to lead under pressure. You do this by ending every high-friction exchange with a consistent behavioral pattern. That could be a short phrase, a composed posture, or even a specific routine they see you perform afterward. Returning to focused work, resetting the conversation, shifting directly to solutions. What matters is repetition, because repetition creates expectation, and expectation becomes identity. Over time, you become psychologically linked with stability, clarity, and power. And that kind of identity doesn't just end conflict, it prevents the next one before it starts. At this point, you've done more than handle confrontation. You've built a psychological loop that turns opposition into respect, emotion into alignment, resistance into gravity. But the final phase of the conflict conversion protocol goes beyond individual interactions. Because the real leverage comes when your posture begins shaping entire environments before you even speak. That's where you gain influence without effort. And that's what the final stage is built to deliver. The final phase of the conflict conversion protocol is preemptive dominance. This is where you stop reacting to conflict and start architecting environments where conflict tilts in your favor before it even begins. Top performers don't just respond well under pressure, they shape the field before the pressure arrives. They carry a baseline presence that changes how people behave around them. That's not charisma. It's engineered perception. And in neuroscience, perception drives prediction, meaning the way people anticipate your response directly alters their behavior. Your presence becomes a mental shortcut in their brain. Respect first, resistance later, or not at all. The first step to establishing this baseline is what I call friction calibration. Every environment has an invisible standard for how much resistance is acceptable. Weak environments avoid friction entirely. Elite ones use calibrated tension as a growth lever. Your job is to signal early that you don't flinch in the face of disagreement, and that pushing against you results in precision, not chaos. That means when you enter new teams, high-stakes partnerships, or unfamiliar dynamics, you inject small but intentional signals of standard setting. That could be through language, framing things around what must be done, not what could be improved, or through posture, composure under friction, even when others lose theirs. The message must land quickly. You don't need to dominate to hold power, but you're prepared to. The second tool is behavioral prediction anchoring. You want people to develop an internal model of how you respond under stress, and you want that model to reduce their impulse to challenge your authority unnecessarily. You create this model through consistency. Never overreact, never chase approval, never explain from a place of insecurity. When someone disrespects, you compress language. When someone elevates tone, you lower yours. This becomes predictable, and predictable control builds perceived structure. The result is that your presence begins to regulate the room. People speak more carefully, challenge more respectfully, and approach disagreement with a different energy because your pattern has become the protocol. The third and final step is identity escalation. Once you've executed this protocol enough times, you're not just managing conflict, you've become a category. The calm strategist, the steady operator, the person whose decisions hold weight without volume. And that identity begins to spread laterally. Other people start referencing you even when you're not present. That's when real authority takes root, when influence survives your absence. The best part, none of this requires permission. You don't need to be the title holder. You don't need to be the loudest in the room. You just need to install these layers with surgical precision, and the environment will recalibrate itself around your presence. So now you have the full system. 4 phases: tension lock, directional redirection, imprint engineering, preemptive dominance. This is not theory. This is how elite performers convert confrontation into currency. You don't avoid conflict. You use it to install frame, increase gravity, and shape how the world responds to you. And if you're ready to keep building the kind of mental infrastructure that turns pressure into power, subscribe to Success Code, because this isn't motivation. This is a playbook for those who intend to win.